What's up, guys? Welcome back to another video on my channel. My name is Josh Fan of ShowMeFootball.com, and today we're going to be previewing the commitment of Luther Burden. So if you've been living under a rock and you have no idea who Luther Burden is, he is the #1 wide receiver in the class of 2022, and he will be committing tomorrow night, and he'll be deciding between three schools, and that would be Mizzou, Georgia, and Alabama. Now, the consensus is that the top two is Georgia and Mizzou, and Alabama is on the outside looking in. He just had a visit to Mizzou last week, and then this week he visited Georgia, so it's pretty much down to those two. But Luther Burden is one of the most dynamic receivers in all of the country. He goes to East St. Louis High School. That's, right across the river from St. Louis, Missouri. And Mizzou fans have been following his recruitment for a long time now. Mizzou was in his original top 5 schools from about a year ago, and then he ended up committing to the University of Oklahoma shortly after that. But Mizzou fans were optimistic, and there were rumblings from the day he committed to Oklahoma that the race was far from over and that Mizzou would keep recruiting him. Well, it seems that eventually paid off because Burden would end up decommitting from Oklahoma a few months ago and put himself back on the open market, which has led us to the point we're at today. And Burden will be making his decision live tomorrow night at 6 p.m. at Herbert Hoover Boys and Girls Club. So, obviously, you guys are likely wanting to hear from me what I think Luther Burden is going to do, but we're going to go into all the details surrounding the commitment of Luther Burden and where I feel like he is leading. Luther Burden is actually a pretty quiet dude. He's kept his commitment, his recruitment pretty tight. It seems like nobody truly knows where he's going to go. If you read pieces and bits of information from like Georgia rivals and 24/7 sports publishers, they all think he's going to Georgia. Meanwhile, all the people on the Mizzou side feel like that he's going to end up at Mizzou. So it's a tight race. But we'll start with this. Let's look at both schools and go over what they had to offer to Luther Burden. We'll start off with Georgia, and really, it's the same pitch that I'm sure they make to almost every single recruit. You will have a chance at a national championship. They're a really good program. They've always recruited well. You're going to be playing with a bunch of other guys. You play in front of 92,000 fans every week. The Georgia tradition is strong, and those fans really get behind the team. If Luther Burden's main priority is winning, then the decision is going to be Georgia. I think that's something that we have to clarify, that if the decision comes down to which school gives Luther Burden the better chance to win at the collegiate level, then Mizzou never had a shot in this. But I don't think that's really anywhere near the top of Luther Burden's priorities, which is good for Mizzou. But if you're really looking for an area where Georgia has an edge over Mizzou, it's their track record of putting wide receivers in the league. Mizzou hasn't really had a ton of notable wide receivers go into the NFL and have a successful career. I think the last notable one that people really think of when you think of Mizzou is Jeremy Maclin, and that was a long time ago. Georgia has McCole Hardman. They got Chris Conley, A.J. Green. George Pickens is likely an NFL prospect coming up pretty soon. Isaiah McKenzie is another one. Georgia has some receivers that they've put in the league. However, I think Mizzou's pitch to counter that would likely be, look, Luther, you're one of the top receivers in the country. If you're good enough to make the NFL, then you're going to get found no matter where you go to school. It doesn't really matter where you go to school. You're still going to show out. You're going to be great. And you're going to go to the NFL either way. It's just up to you where you want to spend those 3 or 4 years before you go to the NFL. All in all, Georgia's pitch is pretty simple, and I'm sure it's one they've used for a lot of elite recruits. But let's look at the Mizzou side of things, because I think their pitch to Luther Burden is a lot more intriguing. And yes, I am a bit biased. I think probably one of, if not the most important factors in Luther Burden's commitment is NIL opportunity. A lot of these guys, now that NIL has been approved by the NCAA, these guys it's going to be a business decision for them. And Luther Burden even stated that after he decommitted from Oklahoma, saying this was a business decision. And I think that's because Missouri is heavily pitching NIL opportunity. If he stays home with Missouri, he's going to be the hometown hero. He's going to have NIL deals lining up. The entire community is going to rally around him. They're going to get excited. And Missouri has done their best to really make Luther Burden feel like a star when he's on his visits, when he's attending these games. Not that Georgia isn't, but it's a different vibe with Missouri, given the fact that Luther Burden is from the area. And if you look at the success of Eli Drinkwitz in St. Louis recruiting as of recently, I think the idea of playing with a lot of his friends and high school teammates is very appealing to Burden. Mookie Cooper, the Ohio State transfer, I know he's been in Burden's ear a lot in all likelihood. Dominic Lovett, who is having a nice freshman season, and he's from East St. Louis, where Burden now attends. The idea of playing with those guys and really making the Mizzou receiver position a strength on this team, I think, is really exciting for a lot of people. Furthermore, I think Missouri is creating a really good situation for Luther Burden to come into. Eli Drinkwitz has been selling his vision for this program to a lot of these recruits, which is why Mizzou is recruiting better than they ever have in the program's history. Drinkwitz just brought in the highest ranked class in Mizzou history. This past cycle, they ranked in the 20s. And if they were to get Burden to join this class, which already ranks in the 20s, they could be up in the teens there. So Mizzou has the potential within the next few years to become a threat in the SEC East, so it's not like Burden would be playing on an SEC bottom feeder for his entire collegiate career. And every good wide receiver wants a good quarterback throwing them the football, and luckily for Mizzou, they have Sam Horn, who is the number one quarterback out of the state of Georgia, committed in this class for 2022. He's a high-end four-star recruit. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, and he's been in Burden's ear too. They just had their visit together when Mizzou played North Texas last week, so they've been talking about the potential of playing together. I also think Luther Burden's family would prefer him to stay close to home, and I think Luther Burden isn't opposed to staying close to home and to family and stuff like that. So that's always something that Missouri has going for them when they're recruiting these local kids. Sometimes you'll have recruits here and there that just want to get away or they want to get out of Missouri, and that's totally understandable. But for the most part, and you're seeing it now with a lot of guys, former St. Louis recruits, they end up transferring closer back to home. Like, for example, Mookie Cooper, the Ohio State transfer. He came back to Missouri after spending a year at Ohio State, and I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that he wanted to become closer to home again. Luther Burden would also be in line for immediate playing time at Missouri. I mean, they're not the greatest team in the world. They could definitely use some more talent at the receiver position. That's obvious. And, I'm not saying that Georgia wouldn't offer Luther Burden the opportunity for immediate playing time either, because he is good enough to earn immediate playing time wherever he goes. But the opportunity at Missouri is larger, and he would most certainly be the number one target, the number one option, whereas, George Pickens is probably still the guy at Georgia when he gets healthy. And if we're being completely honest, Georgia is not a team that is known for throwing the ball to their receivers. They run the ball a lot. They like to throw to their tight ends. I don't know if that's an offense that Luther Burden would totally enjoy playing in. So those are your pitches from both schools. It's up to you guys which pitch you think is stronger, but ultimately it doesn't matter because it's Luther Burden's decision, not yours. And I'm sure there's a lot of aspects that I'm not even thinking of that could go into Luther Burden's decision. But all of that being said, what do I think Luther Burden is going to do? I think if you guys have been reading the tea leaves for a while, Missouri has been the leader for Luther Burden for some time. It's a slight lead. It's been a slight lead, and things can always change. And Luther Burden is fresh off his Georgia visit, and you never want to rule out what changes a visit could do and how that could convince a kid to commit elsewhere. But if you've truly been following closely for some time, I think it's pretty obvious that Mizzou is the leader for Luther Burden because of a lot of the reasons I mentioned in the pitch. But, Guys, he's visited Mizzou several times. He went up there for a bunch of spring ball. He went up there for multiple games to watch. He just visited again for the North Texas game. And, this was, I think, his second visit to Georgia, only he took his last official visit. Well, not his last official visit, but his last one that he's taking before his commitment, probably to get one last look and make sure that he's making the right decision. But honestly, I think there's a pretty good chance that Luther Burden has already made a decision. He's just waiting to announce. I know there was a story that came out from 24/7 Sports today where they asked Luther Burden about his visit to Georgia, and he said it was great. Guys, recruits always will say their visits went great. Like, unless something went horribly wrong, like, they're not going to say their visit was bad. All the visits are good. But he also did give a quote that, he may not have his decision made all the way up until he gets to the table where he's ready to announce. I don't think that's true. I think that's just him building suspense for his commitment and getting all the attention possible. You don't want to give away your commitment before it even happens. He wants that moment for himself. I don't truly think that he's not going to know where he's going up until he's ready to commit at 6 p.m. tomorrow night. Otherwise, I think he would push back his commitment date. If he pushes back his commitment date, then we can have a different conversation, but I don't think that's happening. I think from the day he decommitted from Oklahoma, he was Mizzou's to lose. He stated it was a business decision, and I think that's because Missouri offers him the best NIL package. His family loves Mizzou. They love Drinkwitz. I think Luther Burden is very fond of Drinkwitz. He's got a ton of guys in his ear about going to Mizzou. The buzz around here is that Luther Burden's going to end up at Missouri. Now, could those people be wrong? Yeah, there's a slight chance, but I think those people are in the know. Of course, the people over on the Georgia side are going to feel confident that he ends up at Georgia, but I think that's just because Luther Burden is a pretty quiet dude, and he's not one to give his decision away. The Georgia publishers and all those guys can continue putting in their crystal ball picks for Luther Burden all they want. There's some very trusted publishers also on the crystal ball page for Luther Burden that also have him going to Mizzou, and those picks have come in rather recently, including one from Alan Schro, who is one of the top predictors of kids and where they'll go for college. He even had a VIP scoop next to it, which means he's heard something that makes him think Luther Burden is going to end up at Missouri. So if I were you, Mizzou fans, I would feel very confident that Luther Burden is going to pick your school. Obviously, Luther Burden's commitment would be huge for Missouri. It would give them a ton of recruiting momentum. That's something that's going to get national attention. People are going to go, wow, Missouri just landed the number one receiver in the country. Who could have seen that coming? They're going to end up, barring, a bunch of kids decommitting, the top-rated class in Mizzou history for the second straight year in a row. It would be a lot of momentum for Drinkwitz. And Mizzou, with the way their season's going right now, they could really use some positive momentum and get the fan base excited again. If there's one thing Drink can hang his hat on at this moment, it's his recruiting. And he even mentioned it after the Texas A&M game that his number one priority after that game was going to be a recruit. Because this team just needs better players and they need better talent. And Luther Burden would be quite the start. Luther Burden would be Mizzou's highest-rated commitment since Dorial Green Beckham, who was the number one player in the country at the time he committed to Missouri. So, yeah, it would be huge on paper. Again, it would get you a lot of momentum, and Luther Burden would still have an official visit left to take. He hasn't actually taken an official to Missouri, but that's because he's pretty close, so he can take unofficials really whenever he wants and go to the games whenever he wants. But I think that last official that he's got in his back pocket is significant because if he is then committed to Missouri, he can come back up and recruit other guys that are undecided that are looking at Mizzou, which would be huge for rounding out the 2022 recruiting class. So, yeah, that's how I feel. We're going to find out tomorrow at 6 p.m. where Luther Burden is ending up. I might live stream my reaction to the commitment or something like that. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But regardless, I'm going to be making a video whenever he commits, talking about it and discussing it. But, yeah, that's all I got for this video. So for those of you watching, leave in the comments, what do you think Luther Burden's going to do with his commitment? And do you think Mizzou has a good shot? But otherwise, make sure you like, share, and subscribe so more Mizzou fans can find this. And I will catch you guys in the next one. See ya.